Evening, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar. Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
All right, welcome, everyone. Councilmember Kovar will be joining us just in a few moments. He and I were both at the board meeting for the volunteer fire department. It's a quarterly meeting, and unfortunately, it's also on Wednesday evening, so we were just there. Looking at our agenda this evening, we did make a change since last week, which was to move the discussion of the sustainability and fossil fuel resolution off of this week because, unfortunately, as you can see, Councilwoman DeBala is not with us, and it's a hard time of year for illness, and so unfortunately, we also, our sustainability manager was dealing with some stuff. So we will move that to next week. And where's the upcoming, sorry. Here it is. Upcoming agenda next week is is Wednesday. I wish it was Friday, February 5th. We have a public hearing on our sustainability and climate action plan. Our voting session next week will be a single reading ordinance approving lease and replacement vehicles for neighborhood services, a single reading ordinance approving purchase of replacement police vehicles. Our work sessions next week will be the Old Town Business Association request to close Laurel Avenue for events on April 25th and June 12th. This is when we will have our sustainability and climate action plans work session. We will also have a work session on proposed stormwater fee and code amendments, and we'll also have committee appointments. On Wednesday, February 12th, we'll be back here at 7:30. We'll have a resolution approving the request to close Laurel Avenue for April 25th and June 12th. Our work session tentatively has the tree ordinance amendments and tree canopy goals resolution. We'll have continued discussion of the sustainability and climate action plan and our quarterly financial report. On Monday, February 17th, just as a reminder, it is President's Day, and the city offices and facilities are closed Sunday and Monday for the holiday. We come back here on Wednesday, February 19th, and so far the only thing on our agenda is tentatively the resolution regarding sustainability and climate action plan. But I'm sure we will fill in more before then. We have quite a bit to get through. The other thing I just want to update folks on as the legislative session is up and running in Annapolis. As I mentioned last week, myself, Councilman DeBala, and Councilmember Kovar are heading up our council's legislative group this year. We met with, by phone, our lobbyists and talked about a number of things. So far, there's nothing to take a position on or hearings to attend to, but folks should know that the Delegate Charkoudian's bill on community choice energy, she had a press conference today. It does now have a bill number, so that's moving forward, and we will continue our advocacy on that. It looks like there will not be 5G legislation moving forward this session, and Councilmember Smith may have more information on that, on what LML is doing, but that does not, it doesn't look like we have to worry about that this year. The three big areas that we're looking at, there are some bills on opportunity zones, housing, and there's an interesting bill that Councilmember Kovar and I are interested in looking at how assessments are done. So we'll be looking at more of that. And as I said, there are no actual items to take action on as of yet. So that's that. The other thing I just wanted to report out on is that we did have our priorities retreat on Saturday. So the council met with staff from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday. We dug into our housing and community development, economic development strategic plan. We talked about the city's race equity work, had an update on capital projects, talked further about our climate change and sustainability plan, and then dove into the budget as well. So it was a very full day, a lot of action items to come out of that. Just a couple of things I do want to highlight that I think were really important. And I'm going to point everyone to Councilwoman Costick's wonderful update this week in her weekly update. So she gave a great synopsis for the Ward 3 residents who received that. But a couple of things that we talked about, and I hope to have a future work session on soon, is really what's going on in the Crossroads area with the Purple Line construction. We all knew about the traffic issues that were happening there. And we're getting more information, unfortunately, about the impact it is having on our small businesses. Delegate Wilkins was out there on Monday with City TV. I just want to thank City TV for their work on this, interviewing a number of the businesses. And so our economic development manager, Samira Cook-Gaines, when she's back in the office, want to schedule some time so she can come talk to us about what she's hearing and the impact there and other things we may be able to do. In addition, we heard a great update on the partnership between the city and Workforce Montgomery. As we heard last week, during public comments, this is really helping a lot of our residents connect with services to help employment. And I just want to do another shout out to Councilwoman Kostick for connecting the staff to Workforce Montgomery. And we spent a good deal of time listening about and hearing about the needs in the community and the ongoing challenges people are facing regarding housing, paying utility bills and other things, and the amount of time our staff spends on that. On our racial equity work, just to update folks, 4 of our city staff members are taking part in the Council of Governments and the Government Alliance on Race and Equity Initiative. They spend at least one whole day working on this as a cohort. There's lots of homework and other things that they're doing. And their project that they've decided on, which I'm very excited about since this is one of the things the council is also looking at, is taking a deep dive and looking at our council-appointed commissions. And so working with them and looking at recommendations to bring back to the full council on that. As I said, we had an update on capital projects, more on the climate change, and a very interesting conversation about how we can build on the great work that was done last year on the budget and move forward on that. So more to come in all those areas. And then finally, just before we get to our presentation tonight, I do want to introduce our new city attorney, Skip Cornbrooks, from the firm Karpinski Colorasi, is that? Calarisi, I'm going to get it right. And Carp is with us and has begun working with the city the month of January. We figured we'd give him about like 3 weeks to get his footing, but Skip, if you'd like to say a few words, or?
Sorry. Thank you very much. I appreciate the vote of confidence from the mayor and council in selecting us through this very diligent process. We are looking forward to rolling up our sleeves, getting to work, and hoping that we meet and exceed your expectations.
Great, wonderful. And we're diving right in tonight, and Skip is going to be here with us as we talk about our election code amendments. So terrific. All right. I think those are all the announcements I have for this evening. So before taking up any more time, I'm going to turn it over to our Council Compensation Task Force group. And I think, are all the members here, or almost all of you? I'll turn it over to, do I need to, but do I turn, because you have a recording, so you're going to go first, Bruce, or?
I'm going to talk first, then I'll get to the point where I signal bien, and we go to the next part, and then we go back to the other microphone.
Awesome.
So, good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. We're the Council Compensation Task Force that you named, and we have our preliminary report. We have some things that we have done some good work on, and we have some other things that we need to continue to do work on. And I'm tapping something here, and I got to get backwards. There. And so this is the outline of the information that we have. And you can see that we have the charter of the task force. We have who we are. We have a section on data analysis and collection, and then we have a section on recommendations. And I want to go to this slide and just introduce our members. David Navari was supposed to be here but had a conflict all of a sudden and couldn't be here, but you'll hear him in part that he narrates. Ashley Nugent and Fred Schultz, Kelly Skelton, Paul Wida, Janet Williams, and is Enku Woldermaiden. So 7 out of 8 are here. There. And so this is the charter, and I just wanted to highlight that we were set to review the salary and other compensation for the mayor and council and recommend whether they should be changed. And the questions that we were to consider are the principles of compensation still appropriate? We are supposed to consider racial equity in the review, and are the salary and level of benefits a barrier to running for office or serving on the council? Are there non-salary considerations that are barriers to service on the council? What other recommendations do we have? And what should be the salary and compensation for the mayor and council elected in the future? And we set this up and started to fill it in terms of the financial information, but then we came up with an issue or two that we're still working on, and so we didn't want to get into this in terms of what the current compensation is until we get some of our questions straightened out. So there's no real data here to show you. And then, as you know, we had a survey of all of you to find out what work you do and how long that takes you and what's involved. And your responses indicated that you spend anywhere between 20 and 50 hours a week, and that's quite a bit of time. And so we wanted to take that into account. When I get to this next one, David Navari put these couple of data slides together, and since he couldn't be here, through the magic of technology, he decided he would provide a narration. And so, if you're ready, Bien.
My name is David Navari, and I'd like to start by apologizing to the council and my fellow task force members that I couldn't be there in person tonight. I totally forgot that I had a conflict with some very expensive tickets, and I just can't miss this. So I recorded my presentation, and hopefully somebody running the briefing can simply click on the audio files, and you'll hear about the slides that I produced and worked with the committee to produce. The first slide, number 7, is 2019 data with 8 municipalities. The next 3 slides is 2016 data, and we had a data set of 132 municipalities. But let's start with the first slide. So in this slide, we show the 8 municipalities. Some of them are similar size as Tacoma Park, and we are presenting both the mayor's salary and benefits and the council's salary and benefits, and comparing those to Tacoma Park, which you see in the brighter red and dark green. In order to do this, we had to make an assumption of the value for the Tacoma Park council benefits, and the assumption in the table is $10,000. So if you look at the insurance and the other benefits, if you did take insurance, it would be roughly right about $10,000. There's a lot of debate and discussion about that because some of the council members, and in fact most of the council members, have not taken insurance, so you're not actually getting the $10,000 value. But I had to make some assumption to produce this table and these charts. So we'll discuss the actual value of the benefits in later slides. So this slide simply compares the data for Tacoma Park to other 8 municipalities. Next slide. Okay, slide 8 is using data from the Maryland Municipal League municipally elected official salary information. There was a survey done in 2012 and 2016 of all the municipalities. The original data set was 132 municipalities, and I had to delete the 2012 data because we can't compare 2012 and 2016 cost data. So I'm left with 91 data points for 2016 data. In this slide, I'm looking at 15 municipalities. The purpose of this slide, and again, what I'm trying to do is tell a story using data visualization. The purpose of this slide is to examine the percentage difference between the mayor and the city council's compensation. And what I wanted to see is if the size of the city affected the way they treated the difference between the mayor and the city council. So what this slide does is it presents two things. The black line shows you the population of the city. So you can see Rockville, roughly right, 60,000 people, and then going all the way down to these smaller cities, Riverdale Park and Mount Rainier. And then what I show with the red bars was the council as a percentage of the mayor's compensation. So if we look at Tacoma Park, it was roughly right, 75% of what the mayor was making. The city council makes 75% of what the mayor is making. So that's what I was looking at, and you can see that there isn't really much correlation. Those bars do not slope down or slope up as population changes. Next slide. Okay, slide 8 is using data from the Maryland Municipal League municipally elected official salary information. There was a survey done in 2012 and 2016 of all the municipalities. The original data set was 130.
Did I?
Okay, so in slide 9, again, I'm taking the 15 largest municipalities, showing both the mayor and the city council compensation, and again, looking to see if there's any correlation between the changing size of the cities. And as you can see, there really isn't. The first thing that jumps out at you is Frederick and Annapolis, where the mayors have a much higher compensation than the other cities. And that's because their mayor literally acts as the city manager. So they can't be compared to our situation. Next slide. Okay, so in slide 9, again, I'm
In slide 9 or slide 10?
in slide 10, it's the exact same data as slide 9, but I've removed Frederick and Annapolis, and I did that so that I could enlarge the y-axis, and now I'm only going up to 30,000, which lengthens all the bars so that you get a better sense, and you can see the relative heights of those bars relative to Tacoma Park. So again, you see the population, you see the compensation of both the mayor and the city council, and you can kind of see where we stack up relative to other communities. Next slide. In slide 10, it's the exact same data as slide 9, but I've removed Frederick.
There we go.
Okay, slide 11. Now I'm just doing the same thing, but with all municipalities that are larger than 3,000 citizens. Some of the smaller ones don't pay at all, and they can't really be compared to our situation. So in this case, there's 34 cities in Maryland that have greater than 3,000 citizens. So this is simply just laying out all of these compensation data, both council and the mayor, so you can get a sense of where we stack up. I put the blue arrow there to show Tacoma Parks, and again, you'll have to ignore the mayor's salary for Frederick and Annapolis, as that's also a city manager function. So there's the data, and thank you for the opportunity to present these charts. That's just one way to look and examine how our council is compensated compared to other cities. Next slide. Okay, slide 11. Now I'm just doing the same thing, but with all.
So we're back on this microphone? Okay. Somebody else is going to take over from here.
Bruce, before you go, do you know on the charts why some of the cities have one asterisk next to them and some have two? I'm just curious. Does that mean anything? Okay, never
Not that
mind.
I
It probably
know of.
doesn't mean anything. All right.
Same reason we advanced 2 slides instead of 1.
Okay. Hi, my name's Ashley Nugent from Ward 2. This is the exciting part of the presentation, so everyone, you should be excited about this part. One of the reasons I joined the task force is because I took a look at the 2003 Principles of Council Compensation, and I was a little taken aback that they hadn't been updated in over 17 years. I think it's going on 17 years now. And I was lucky enough to be working with a group who thought that they needed to be updated as well. So here we are. As a group, we decided that we didn't need to go through all the 2003 principles and explain to you why we don't like them, I guess you could say. For example, number one, just as an example, the position of mayor and council member are part-time. Well, we know that's not true. At the very, very least, we know the position of our mayor is not a part-time position. So what we decided to do is we took a fresh look at the principles as applied to Tacoma Park today. As we all know, with this council and previous councils, equity has been a big lens that we are looking through all of these issues. And so council compensation is an equity issue. And that's how we are treating these new principles. So as you'll see, we drafted a purpose. And what we need you to do, I guess, is the better way to go about what we need you to do is, it's not going to be a surprise, I think, that we're going to come back to you and recommend an increase in salary, as well as a more expansive benefits program. But what we need you to do first is take a look at the principles of compensation, take a week, look them over, give us edits, add, remove, however you see fit what you want to do with these principles of compensation. But we need these back to act as the foundation for the recommendation for the salary and for the benefits that we're looking at. So we've drafted a purpose to provide the mayor and council members with salary and non-salary benefits to help ensure that all residents have a fair chance to run for city elective office. The task force questions that you asked us is if the current principles were adequate. So we are telling you no with this. The first one that we drafted gets to the equity issue. The City of Tacoma Park is committed to the fair and equitable administration of compensation, which includes salary and benefits. Number two, the compensation shall be balanced between the city's financial condition and the service and stewardship provided by the mayor and council members. I think that we would all like to pay you a lot more than we're going to be able to come back and tell you, and you might even bring it down lower. We understand that this is an equity issue, and we're going to try to do the best we can, but this also needs to be balanced with the city's financial condition and the city manager's budget. So number three is my personal favorite. I know that Dave spent a lot of time working on all of those charts for you, but this one sort of throws those charts out the window. In Tacoma Park, we do a lot more things than other municipalities. Our mayor and council members, you all devote lots and lots of time to residents' issues. I think Bruce had even mentioned back in the day that when email wasn't around, you all got letters delivered to you by the police department once a week, and that was your communication with with the residents. And that is not how it is here in Tacoma Park any longer. So number 3 is my favorite. In the recognition of the high-quality, community-centered services rendered by the Tacoma Park City Council, the city should strive to maintain a compensation structure that provides fair and reasonable compensation and which need not be comparable with municipalities of similar size. So we don't need to compare ourselves with Hyattsville, Mount Airy, similar sized municipalities, because we do it differently here. And I think that's what is unique about our city. Do with that one what you see fit, but it is my personal favorite. Number 4, in order to recognize increased responsibility, the mayor's salary shall be greater than the council members. Council compensation information shall be transparent and easily accessible. I know there's been some issues where, purported issues of transparency, which I don't agree with, but, if you can easily find salary listed on the city website, I think it's there. We'd like to keep it there. And the last one comes from sort of an issue. Paul was on the last task force, and he mentioned that he didn't know that the principles of compensation could actually be updated. So we wanted to add something that said that the council compensation and the principles should be reevaluated at least every 4 years. And that's just something that we like. All right, so I think that Kelly is going to come up and discuss what she thinks is the most exciting part of the presentation.
I think you already said it, but I'll say it again. So, thank you. I'm Kelly Skelton, Ward 6. I think Ashley really covered it, but one piece of this that we think is a real possibility is to look at benefits as a way of providing access for people to the city council. Specifically, we would like to speak more with the HR department about what portions of the current benefits that the city provides to its employees can be extended to the council. For example, FSA plans or cafeteria plans or deferred compensation methodologies, to take that portion that could be applied to health insurance benefits, that portion of compensation that could be applied to health insurance benefits, but if it's not being used in that manner, how else could it be used to provide the resources that an individual might need in order to consider serving on the city's council? And we feel like that's a real big opportunity, especially, for me, for coming from where I am, city providing like an FSA plan where childcare expenses could be covered would be real improvement to access for this council, especially given the times that you meet and how often you are working. So we would recommend that the city look at a lump sum amount to be provided to each council member to use not in an accountable way, in an accountable plan to cover their costs. And that member-specific costs or needs associated with serving on the council. And our last slide, sorry, I didn't slide it forward. There you go. Oh, wait, nope, she did slide it forward, thank you. And then finally, as Ashley mentioned, we would like the city to really consider this as a way to provide access to the city council and even to further offices from there to people who might not otherwise be able to consider serving, and to have more diversity in terms of age, income, race, ethnic background, et cetera, on the city council. And we think this is a powerful way of doing that, and one of the reasons why we should not be hampered by comparing ourselves with other municipalities in Maryland, because they're not thinking, they're not thinking of it through this lens. And frankly, in our research, we found that no municipality is currently seeing access to the city council through this lens. And we can really create a conversation about who gets to govern through this effort. Thank you. You done?
So we're happy to turn it over to you and see what feedback you can give us, and we'll continue working and come back to you in a month.
All right. Great. Well, this is fantastic. I just want to say thank you to all of you. And I think you sped by the chart, the slide really quickly on how often and how quickly you all have met to pull this together. And so I just talk about working hard. You all have been working very hard on this, and I think I can speak for myself and my colleagues to say we really thank the comprehensive dive that you did into this. I'll turn over to my colleagues in a minute, but I just have one question and one comment. Can you explain a bit more when you're talking about the lump sum benefit? So would that be contain other benefits that the city is already providing to other employees, or is it like giving each person like $5,000 and you go spend it however you will, or?
We were originally thinking that it was a cafeteria plan, and then
Okay.
we were dissuaded from calling it a cafeteria plan.
Okay.
Because that has other meanings. So
Yeah.
it was to call it a lump sum benefit so that everybody gets the same amount of benefits, and the distribution of that based on individual need can be different.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, great. And then just one observation, last week I was at the Mayor's Innovation Project, and the mayor of Rochester, Minnesota, which is actually a city not too dissimilar to Tacoma Park, though, but they're really close to the Mayo Clinic, so that's a little different than us. But they actually, while we were at this conference, their city council changed their compensation to be reflective of a certain percentage of the area median income. And so it increased every year. And that's just something I wanted to throw out as another alternative as you all are continuing to think about that, because that is a formula that then would change and then is reflective also of what's happening in the community, and you could set that percentage at whatever you could recommend whatever you thought was fair. So anyway, just wanted to give you that example from Rochester, Minnesota. And I'll open it up to my colleagues for questions and comments. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. It looks like you met a lot in a short period of time, so that's great. I just had two questions. One, I wasn't quite clear on the lump sum concept. So the lump sum, if I got it correctly, would be available and somebody could then pay for health benefits or something of that nature. But if they weren't using any of these services, would they just not get the money, or would they get the money anyway?
One of the things we thought about was that it could go into a deferred comp, because the city has a deferred comp program. So it wouldn't be too hard to include you in that. And that's a way of, if you didn't need the health insurance, you got to do the pension. If there were other things that, or childcare or whatever the needs might be, that you could park it there.
But that means you would get that in some way later, or?
Yes.
Okay. The other question is, it says here in item 2, slide 13, compensation shall be balanced between the city's financial condition and the service and stewardship provided by the mayor and the council members. Does that mean that's somehow taken into account each year, or just as a conceptual framework?
We were trying to recognize that the city always has budget constraints, and you can't just do what you might want to do in terms of compensation.
Okay, but that doesn't mean every year it would be done, it would be taken into account that way, or would the structure that you're proposing automatically have that taken into account? I'm not sure I'm phrasing it right. And would there be a separate calculation made every year, or would it be, here's our new system, which includes that?
I'm not sure I have a good answer to that.
Okay,
It's more conceptual. It's a conceptual issue.
okay.
Councilman Kostick.
First of all, thank you all very much. I really appreciate all the work and the thought that is going into this. I just have a brief comment here, and I wanted to say I really like the direction that you're going, and I think the proposed principles that you've presented here seem like they make a lot of sense. I'm going to take a little closer look at them after the meeting, but in general, I really like the emphasis on equity, and I think it's also important to, as you noted, emphasize the fact that the council here is doing a lot more than in some other cases as well, outside of our size of the municipality itself. I mean, I'm just curious, this isn't a specific task that we've given you, but in terms of thinking about equity, I think there are some barriers that go beyond compensation. And I'd be really curious if you can help us sort of think through those things as you do this work. I mean, some of them are logistical in terms of just, being available for daytime meetings, and being available to come to a meeting at night and not necessarily know when it's going to end. So if you have a nighttime job or you have a child, you need to have a childcare provider during that time, being able to say the meeting may end at 10 o'clock or it may end at 2 a.m. and not really knowing those things can be a real challenge. And just sort of the unpredictability as well, I think, of the schedule. It's not a 9-to-5 job. So, some things are very predictable. I'm on the Transportation Planning Board. I go down into DC once a month for a meeting, but other things pop up, sometimes very quickly, and it can be really hard if you have other obligations to balance those things. So I think it would be useful to think about those things a little bit and how, yes, I think compensation can help with that, but there's still just sort of this logistical barrier that the compensation for the council and the mayor probably will, maybe for the mayor, but for the council, I think probably will not get to sort of a regular full-time wage no matter what. So I think that creates some additional equity challenges. And obviously there are a lot of other considerations as well. So I just love for you all to think about those things, and if those things come up, I'd love to get some recommendations. Thank you all.
Great. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you guys for doing this. I really appreciate it. I'm excited that you guys are looking at something other than the similar size of jurisdictions in Maryland. That has always been a sore point for me because, you go to some cities and, they don't do half the stuff that we do. They just maybe meet once a month. So I think that's really important. One question, the idea of full-time, part-time, do we have to say what the council is? I mean, is there legally a reason we call it a full-time council or a part-time council? I can answer
that. I think that the reason it's part-time is just because that's what the principle in 2003 says. We were really adamant on taking out words full-time and part-time because I really do think, we got some numbers from you all, 20 to 50 hours. And even as Councilmember Costick is saying, it's, you just don't know what you're doing week to week. So I think that the part-time language just actually does come from the principle of 2003. And that's one of the first that we have done away with.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
So you guys are considering just getting rid of anything that says part-time or?
Yes. So,
Okay.
so the main recommendation is to get rid of take the principles of 2003 off the books.
Okay.
And replace them with the updated principles. And that's going to be based on your recommendations and revisions, or if you just like them how they are, we can go forward with that.
Okay, good. And then the last thing is on the diversity objectives, I would recommend that you put race first because we do have a racial equity policy. And we don't have a policy for age or income.
Yes, I agree. And I think that the diversity objective, we're actually going to work on a little more. We talked about actually constructing like a nice diversity statement that can
Okay.
go fit very well with these.
Okay, good.
So that's where we're at. So
Thank
thank
you.
you for those comments.
Appreciate it.
Great. Actually, just to piggyback on what Councilmember Smith, I think, pointed out, and just think about whether or not you want to call it the diversity objective versus equity.
Yeah.
So
Great
just
point.
you can have that conversation. I'm not saying, just it be intentional about whether or not we want to use diversity versus equity. Councilwoman Searcy. Oh, Janet, did you want to speak to that? Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. One of the things that we did look at was instead of calling it diversity, we was thinking to use the word inclusiveness, because as well with the et cetera, it still doesn't show differences in ability, age, income, race. Is a lot more pieces to it. So most people use diversity. We were thinking about changing it really more into inclusiveness versus diversity.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Janet. Councilwoman Searcy. Oh, no, Bruce had something.
And
Go ahead.
I just had one quick thing to add in answer to Councilmember Smith's first question about part-time, full-time. I know one thing that came up was, my understanding was that if you work for the federal government or some other places, that there are restrictions on what you can do as kind of another job outside work, and so you can't label, even though you may consider this to be a full-time job, you can't call it a full-time job. So we were trying to stay away from full-time, part-time altogether.
Great. Actually, Bruce, before you sit down, can you flip back to the recommended
Which number was it?
principles? I think it's the slide right before this. Yeah.
13.
One more. Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Searcy.
First, I just want to reiterate my appreciation, as my colleagues have, for all of the hard work and thought that you all have put into this. It definitely shows, and I for sure appreciate the amount of effort that has gone into this. A couple of things that I thought were really, really thoughtful, and I definitely support. One is recognizing, as my colleagues have stated, the fact that the expectations of the citizens or the residents of Takoma Park, of their council, may be different. And so in order to make sure that, members of the council and the mayor are adequately compensated for not just the number of people, but the expectations that the populace place on in terms of the level of responsiveness and timeliness of kind of addressing issues is important to take account of. And so I appreciate the fact that you all have done that. I want to echo Councilmember Kostick's point. I was going to raise something similar about compensation is one piece of the puzzle that we're trying to address in order to try to encourage more people to run for office in the city. If there are other ways that the council may be able to think about other things, like, for example, sometimes you're paying out of your pocket to run, right? Sometimes you don't raise enough money, or you're not able to gather enough resources, and we'll talk about some of the election things down later today, but sometimes you don't get enough money to actually go and buy the necessary signage and flyers and things like that. So maybe the city could start to think about things like grant programs or allotments to try to help individuals who want to run, but maybe wouldn't have the level of resources out of their pocket to start a campaign, right? So could we consider some novel approaches to kind of help people who might be interested in running, in addition to thinking through some of the other challenges that people may have in terms of compensation? Again, I know you all have been charged with compensation and not trying to blow up your mission.
But that's what we do, by the way. Right? So you're not alone in any task force. We do it to them all.
So what I was just going to say is that a lot of that did come up, and Fred and Bruce, especially because of their viewpoints, raised a lot of good issues that we kept telling them to put aside because it's called the Takoma Park Compensation Task Force, and so since those issues weren't relative to compensation, we put them aside, but we actually have talked a lot about those. And so if you would like to launch the Takoma Park accessing the city council committee, I'm sure there's some people here who would run or who would agree to serve on that committee, because we did happen to come up with a few things like specifically yard signs, and an issue that Fred raised was that now that we're with the general cycle, all of the costs of running for these offices are going to increase, because to be even visible amongst the whole melee, it is going to be a challenge. And how can we support people and their desire to run? And so I think that's a really important topic, and possibly something that we can write out for you a few things that we've thought of, but before we get into that season, we still have a little window here where we could think about some possibilities of tools, even just information on how to do it, for example, for people who might not have even considered that as an option before. So, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that would be absolutely awesome. And I know that folks, we've raised questions about the lump sums, and that'll be something that'll need to be thought through. I actually thought that that was so innovative, because I'm one of those people who, through my day job, like I don't take advantage of the medical, I don't take advantage of the dental, but for others who may be in a similar boat and would rather direct those funds to like an FSA or direct those funds to some sort of compensation for childcare that's logically going to increase as a result of the work that they're doing here, I really support that as a novel approach of trying to, you know, if we're forced to kind of deal with not increasing the bottom line, that might be a novel way of kind of making sure that people are better able to take advantage of the benefits that we are offering. And one other point, I know that David was unable to come, but one point in the data tables that he had put together that I thought was pretty, the way that the math was done, was I would encourage him to take a look at the percent difference between the mayor and the council salaries for all of the cities that he looked at, primarily because it stood out to me that our mayor, the pay differential between council and mayor for us was not on par with the differential that other cities have. So it seemed to me, and I know that the way that the numbers were calculated weren't, may not make that very apparent, but if you were to look at, for example, like Rockville has about, maybe like a $5,000 difference, or Bowie has more like a $6,000 difference. So we may want to look at, I guess the cleanest way to say it is the difference between the height of the red and the height of the green. And whether or not for the city of Tacoma Park, you see, if you were to go back, Bruce. Yeah. So if you look at the difference between the height of the green and the height of the red for Tacoma Park, they're closer. But then if you look at some of the other cities, there's a wider difference. And that means that those cities, the difference in salary between mayor and council is a lot greater, right? And the fact that we're closer, it may not be quite right. There may need to be a higher pay differential between the mayor position and the rest of the council. So I would just encourage you all, when you're talking to David, to kind of look at that difference in height, because that's where we probably would need to, that information would be valuable to you all when you're trying to figure out what that pay differential should be. Thank you.
Great. All right. Even though Councilwoman DeBala is supposed to be home recuperating, she is texting me. So I will ask her questions. She sends her thanks to you all. One question she had is, are your recommendations of the committee pretty much the consensus view, or are there dissenting views on your task force? Are you all in general agreement, is one of her questions. Yes. I see Janet nodding and Bruce is nodding, okay. The other thing, she would just like to underscore what Councilman Kostick and Searcy said about recruiting and issues outside of compensation, which is what we tasked you with. And I think as you take our comments back and think about it, it would be great to get your feedback on how many of you are willing to extend your tour of duty and continue these conversations, because the council could consider passing a resolution and extending the tasks of this task force. So feedback on whether or not some of you are willing to do that and want to move forward, and what the objectives would be and how you would outline that. To give us feedback on that would be great. Councilmember Schultz. Councilmember Schultz. Once a council member, always a council member.
I respond naturally to that statement. Just thank you so much. Yes, the question about whether any dissenting comments or disagreements, there actually were, but we argued them out to the point where, frankly, we come up to the point where I think we can say we have complete consensus on these, on the principles that we've put together there. I don't think we'll ever get perfect consensus on when we get down the road piece as to the actual dollar amounts that we're going to recommend. But that brings me to the point is that the actual dollar amounts that we're going to recommend are just a recommendation. Obviously, you guys are the ones that determine in the final analysis what the city can afford to pay. And so, but what we will be able to provide you is kind of a range of what we think the mayor and the city council members ought to be paid based on these principles. And the only other thing I would add is that in your thinking on this, and if you want to change your charge, focus primarily on the principles and the wording of those principles, because that's the thing that we feel is the guiding ideas for what we're trying to accomplish. So if we've omitted anything, or the text needs to be adjusted in some way to refine it, that would be very helpful to us.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments from the council? Does the task force have any questions that you haven't gotten feedback on tonight that you need from us, or any other direction so that you can complete your tasks?
No, but we do want to thank Jesse for being at all of our meetings and providing us a lot of data and water. And and I think in our next steps, we're probably going to need to talk with a few other members of staff. And so you've been amazing at facilitating all of that. So thank you so much for your time.
Great. All right, I just want to say thank you again for all of your work. We look forward to having you back. And, you know, if you have other questions for us as you're looking at this, we're always available. And I just want to extend my thanks, especially to Mr. Rita, for doing this 2 times now. This is your 2nd time around. We appreciate it. Sometimes it's nice to have some continuity on the different task force. So thank you all for your work, and we look forward to the final recommendations. Thank you. All right. Well, that was the task force on council compensation. We'll now move on to general public comments. We do not have any voting items this evening, so we'll just move to general public comments as soon as our compensation task force makes their way out. Thank you.
I'll be right there. Those will be quick. Public comment?
Oh,
Is
yeah,
that
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Put another hat on.
Yeah.
Is it okay? 3
All right.
minutes?
You got it.
Hi, Ashley Nugent, Ward 2. In your blue packet is a flyer for the Friends of the Tacoma Park Libraries. First, it's not there.
I am so sorry.
It's okay.
It is not there.
It's not there.
It should be.
Okay.
Yes. We will get it to you.
Jesse's been really busy. So the Friends are having their first fundraiser outside of the book sales in about 10 years, I think. They're raising money for Summer Quest. Their goal is to raise about $1,200. The Friends pay for Winter and Summer Quest and a lot of the great programming that goes on in the library, like ESOL, Circle Time, the book clubs. So the fundraiser is going to be Saturday, so next Saturday the 8th, from 8 to 10. It'll be at the VFW. We have a great band, or the Friends. The Friends have a great band, and they've received a lot of fantastic donations from local businesses for a raffle. There's gift certificates from Ace Hardware, Girl on the Vine, Mad Fitness, Yoga Heights, the Co-op. They have food donated from Middle Eastern Cafe / Olive Lounge. So it's going to be a really great time. I hope you all will stop by if you can. If not, that's okay too. And I'll be there. Hope to see you all there. All right. Thank you guys. Have a good night.
Great. Thank you very much.
And just switch glasses. I can't be here next week when you discuss sustainability. Jacqueline Moore, 7005 Aspen Avenue, Ward 2. I have some just suggestions in regard to the city's climate action plan. Eliminating food waste consistently ranks among the top 5 solutions to the problem of climate change. The city of Tacoma Park got off to a good start on eliminating food waste when curbside composting began. However, we're missing a huge swath of the city because this service is not offered to the residents of our larger multi-unit apartment buildings. Think of the opportunities to not only drastically reduce food waste, but to also get more of our residents engaged in green actions and to do outreach among the more diverse members of our city. Bring people in, don't shut them people out from fully participating in what should be a citywide effort. I've heard that we're not able to send as much of our compost to the facility in Prince George's County that takes our food waste, yet our county executive is looking to this same facility to take in waste from the rest of the county. If the facility can handle the waste of the million-plus county residents, why can it not handle all the food waste from our city of 17,000? Speaking of food, what are some ways that we can help our residents consider moving to a more plant-based diet? Perhaps a few inches of newsprint in the monthly city newsletter could be used to publish easy-to-make, healthy vegan recipes. The city could offer some free cooking demonstrations at the community center to show people techniques and practices that would make vegan cooking easier for them in their own homes. The burden of finding climate solutions cannot only fall on the shoulders of owners of single-family homes, duplexes, and small condo or apartment buildings with less than 25 or so units. Our city tends to rush forward to implement programs so that we can be first in line with novel ideas when we need to be more deliberate. An example is the replacement of older streetlights with LED bulbs. We rushed forward with the installation of the LED bulbs so that we would look good to the outside world. However, if there had been more time for reasoned thought and research, we could have waited until lower wattage bulbs that generate fewer lumens were available. The bright lights are damaging to birds and other wildlife, and they contribute to our area's light pollution problem. Geothermal is an amazing technology, but you still need some way to generate the electricity needed to run the system. Digging the wells needed is not only complicated and expensive on our cramped little lots, but it can damage the roots of our already stressed trees. One of my friends installed geothermal, but she still has to use a coal-fired source to run the system. This is in southern Maryland. Another one of her trees just died due to root damage from the initial well digging 5 years ago. Solar panels are amazing, but the rare earth minerals needed to make them are mined in ways that are devastating to the planet. The use of child labor and slave labor in the countries that have these rare earth minerals have little respect for human rights. Let's work on helping homeowners do energy assessments and then help them tighten up their homes so that less natural gas and other non-climate friendly energy sources have to be used. I am going to be emailing this to you. Let's see, let me skip down. Another area where we could eliminate the need for use of diesel and other fossil fuels is with tighter oversight of city contracts that involve construction. Speed bumps were recently installed on Lincoln Avenue between Elm and Jackson Ave. The speed bumps did not meet the specs for the street and they were ripped out and redone. This means that a diesel-drinking Bobcat, asphalt truck, and the truck needed to cart the Bobcat were back on the scene redoing the speed bumps. Where was Public Works? Who was in charge of monitoring the contractor?
Thank you, Ms. Moore.
I'll email you the rest of the comments.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Steve Nadell. I'm a long-term Ward 2 resident. I am here to talk about the climate and sustainability issue because I was traveling last week and wanted to weigh in. Professionally, I do work in the field for many decades, working on practical energy efficiency and housing programs and policies. I do want to make clear I'm speaking on my own behalf, and I'm not claiming to speak for my spouse, who I know all of you know. And she'll call me.
She'll text me if you speak at all.
Right,
so.
Exactly. Right, I don't claim to. Yes, absolutely. I know I have limited time. I do believe the draft resolution needs to be beefed up on transportation, but in the limited time I have, I'm going to concentrate on buildings. Basically, the buildings provisions in the draft fall into 3 buckets. Let's do benchmarking and home energy scores for buildings in the near term. This provides information to purchasers, renters, owners, so that some of them can use it to voluntarily upgrade. Studies typically indicate on the order of 3 to 7% savings just from the benchmarking. This also provides vital data to say, what is the range of performance? How much will it cost to upgrade to different levels? Without this data, it will be very difficult to estimate the cost of subsequent steps. So I think that first step is critical. In a few years, then, you could use this data to start considering appropriate performance standards, but it's going to be very difficult to do that without this data. Then you have the third step, which was to ultimately consider restrictions on fossil fuels. The proposal is for 2045. A lot of this should be done when existing equipment needs to be replaced. You do have time to consider it, and I don't think that issue should decide one way or another whether you move forward on some things in the near term. I would note that equity is a critical issue for all of these. For the first one, for the benchmarking, the costs are relatively low. My understanding, I don't want to speak for our sustainability manager, but she is tentatively thinking of setting aside some money in her budget to pay for this benchmarking cost for low, moderate income households. She should speak for herself. For the other two building steps, I think a critical part of deciding whether the council wants to move forward with the details as opposed to just a general statement of policy will be, is there adequate grant and financing to make sure that these steps are affordable, particularly to low, moderate income residents of the city. So to conclude, I'd encourage you to move forward with a resolution with probably significant amendments from the draft, in particular making clear that you have wiggle room to work out details later. We're not trying in any way to bind things. But two, I'd encourage you to set aside time right after the budget to start working out the details of the first bucket. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great.
Mayor, council members, I'm Michael O'Hora again, and I appreciate the chance to have my 3 minutes worth. Last Wednesday, when the sustainability program was introduced, it struck me that there was some confusion about what the resolution actually would mean that was to be voted on some point next month. And I just wanted to tell you what my understanding of it was, and it's this, that in voting in favor of the resolution, the city would be saying that, yes, we are in favor of moving toward reducing greenhouse gases. We are in favor of a more sustainable city. But the extent of the resolution is nothing more than saying that the council and the mayor are giving permission to the city to build those blocks that would constitute an agreement somewhere down the road. And it's nothing more. To concerns that were voiced Saturday that people are afraid of having all of the restaurants in Tacoma Park leave because their gas stoves have been confiscated. I say I never would have endorsed that. I like eating at the Republic. So I would say just exempt the restaurants. To the constituents who are concerned about having their gas stations confiscated in 20 years, I personally think that in 20 years, gas stations will look a lot different because of the technology change. But to those concerns, I would say exempt the gas stations. These don't have to be critical issues that hold up the council. And I'll reiterate in my last 52 seconds that it's only a permission to establish a framework to get from where we are to where we collectively want to go. And I'm grateful that even though I'm not a resident, that you continue to let me speak every week. And I keep waiting for the Sergeant of Arms to haul me out of here, but thank you and have a good night.
Thank you very much. Great. Do we have any other public comments this evening?
Yeah, good evening. I'm David Blockstein from Ward 3, Sycamore Avenue, and I'd like to talk about climate and energy and economics and climate and energy justice. So let me start with a few points, overall points. One is that climate change is disproportionately impacting the poor and disadvantaged. That's true in this country. It's true in this community. It's true globally. And I will provide some sheets with data for each of these. Second, that poor people, economically disadvantaged people, spend a greater percentage of their income on energy, generally greater than 10%. Third point, solar energy prices are dropping like a rock. In the last decade, prices are going down 10% annually. It's faster than even the experts have thought. We are nearing breakthroughs within the next few years in battery storage. Capacity is going to increase, price is going to go around. Bottom line is that solar energy already is cheaper than natural gas. It's getting better every day. So how can Tacoma Park deal with this issue of economic justice? Number one, help residents and businesses to stop wasting money on their energy and putting money into Pepco's pockets. So do things like swap light bulbs for LEDs, energy efficient buildings. Number two, help people to get cheap renewable energy. Help them to secure financing through things like the County Green Bank, rebates at the state and local level. Number three, help people stop paying for expensive gas for their cars and homes. Have things like chargers available. Facilitate conversions from natural gas boilers to electric, which then can be tied in with solar, and support community choice energy that allows bulk purchases. Hey, guess what? Those are the things that are in your resolution and in your framework. So why deny our community and the residents of our community the access to the clean energy revolution that is taking place? Let's get going. This is a great opportunity. This is about benefits. This is about opportunity for all people, especially disadvantaged. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments this evening?
Barely made it.
Right.
Gopal Jha, 810 Colby. Just been thinking a lot about how the city is faced with so much work that's so daunting, and we have to do it yesterday. And my interest today is the trees, thinking about all of the different things that we already have going on to get that going. I've been trying to figure out the whole street tree and city, like the city right-of-way and street tree and city land tree planting, what that plan is, what the schedule is, how we do it right now. And we had a bunch of emails sort of on the Committee of the Environment mailing list today. And it turns out it's sort of this, it's a little bit ad hoc. The planting depends on what was removed, whether or not residents requested it, and what Jan's plan is, which is, again, I'm not sure how it's determined. And I also just kind of assumed that the city has plants every street tree possible, because why wouldn't it? It's like the biggest bang for the buck for basically everything that we're trying to nail down, and they're cheap, you know. And I mean, I think not only are trees a keystone species, they're also really sexy as an issue. And it would be pretty awesome to be the, like, a city that has every street tree possible planted, for example. I think reporters would take notice. And I think it's something that would help us. And the other thing I'm puzzled by is right now we're offering, and I think the city is planting 2 non-native trees for every native tree. And when residents want a street tree, that's the choice they have. And I don't really understand that, because it's, we've talked about this in various forums. It's the urban forest. It's not just having carbon sequestration, although that's an important goal. So I don't understand why we do that, and native trees have a better survival rate anyway. So, yeah, I just think that there's a lot that we don't know, that we need to know. Thanks.
Thank you. And just to let you know, because I know I did the agenda earlier, next week we are talking about the returning to the tree ordinance and the tree canopy, and so these are conversations. So thank you very much, and I appreciate all your pictures on Facebook of the trees. They're gorgeous.
Good evening, Satjeevan Ikle Khalsa, Ward 2, Conway Avenue. I'm coming to speak in support of a bold climate action plan that was presented last week. And I wanted to put up 2 ideas for consideration that hopefully address some of the concerns that I've been hearing. People like their gas stoves. Cooking with gas is a very low carbon footprint compared to heating with gas, so I'd propose an exemption for natural gas cooking appliances at the residential and commercial level. And second, there's a very valid concern around the cost burden for property owners, especially low, moderate, and fixed income residents. And for proposals for that, the plan already has a longer timeline for the more significant costs. So those can be planned for, especially if they're advertised and outreach is done in advance. The plan also has proposals for need-based financial supports, and I endorse that. And anytime we're offering about financial supports or financial incentives, I like to offer a funding source to go with that. And I'm going to propose or offer a progressive property tax surcharge for property values of over $500,000. And that could be scaled up. Maybe that level might not be the right level, but starting at some level, property values that exceed that will pay a higher property tax, which could provide services of all types, but especially for environmental ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments this evening?
I wanted to share with you 2 recent reasons for moving forward on divestment. In the last week, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has linked emergency, climate emergency and nuclear weapons by declaring, and in declaring that its doomsday clock now registers 1 minute before midnight. They made that connection. It would be good if we did. And the second one is hundreds of people gathered on the front steps of the New York City Hall to call for divestment of nuclear financing. These are our people. They signed the ban like we did. And so we respectfully make the following request to you, our City Council, that you reaffirm and amplify the 2017 Council support for socially responsible nuclear weapons-free investment and banking by including it as a priority in this year's plan. That you further enable Council support by directing the City Manager to choose new appointees who have expertise in socially responsible investing and community banking. And finally, and to take steps to establish a timetable for transfer of funds and publish a bi-monthly progress report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments this evening? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming and for your comments. Now we will move on to council comments. Any comments from the council? Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. My perception has been evolving that homelessness is a growing problem in this land of opportunity. Today, found another young lady, 18-year-old, who was homeless and looking for something. We were able again to place her in a home and help out, but again, I have a growing concern that we need to have a more strategic approach to how we can assist these members of our community. A previous family that we were able to help is now living on Maple Avenue here in Tacoma Park, and they were a family that was involved in a serious accident in September of 2018. Where both adults in the family were severely injured. Neither of them have been able to go back to work yet, and they have 2 young children. And as a few of us have tried to help them along and assist them, it's probably more than a few of us can do. And I was thinking that just brainstorming today that maybe there might be some community members who would like to form a little group with us to kind of adopt this family for a while as they get back on their feet. And if anyone's interested in that, I would appreciate your contacting me, and I'll try to be more specific in the near future on how we can provide for this family as they recover from these injuries. And then lastly, I just wanted to make the observation that, you know, I've long agreed with the opinion that the news coverage is what makes democracy work in this country. And it's disappointing to see that one of the last widely circulated papers in Montgomery County is going to be closing its doors tomorrow. Yep. And the Montgomery Sentinel is going out of operation. And there are a couple of smaller organizations around doing local news, but it's not just sad, it's disconcerting to see how independent news is disappearing from our communities. I have no solution, but I think that we should all be concerned and should be thinking about what is a solution. And I'm not sure Facebook is it.
No.
Thank you.
Or Twitter.
Or Twitter. Definitely not. Councilman Kostick.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to everyone for coming tonight. I really appreciate the many public comments, specifically on the Climate Action Plan and the thoughtfulness in terms of making recommendations on it. I do actually have an announcement regarding Twitter, since you discussed Twitter. So there is a hashtag Transpo Bingo, which is a transportation challenge that is going on right now in DC, primarily aimed at DC elected officials and people living in DC, but there are a number of people, myself included, who are from outside of DC itself in the region who are participating. And I want to just encourage people to do it. It's a very fun challenge. The idea is there's a bingo card online you can get, and you try to experience some different aspects of transportation and mass transit during this week. So a few of the examples are taking a multimodal trip using bike and metro, or using bus and metro, or scooter and bus. Another example is thanking a bus driver or helping someone else out on your transit trip. And if you're on social media, you can post there, or you can just do it yourself as an opportunity to experience some different transportation options around the region. Related to that as well, I wanted to note that Montgomery County recently named a Vision Zero coordinator. Vision Zero, as many of you know, is the initiative that the county has adopted to seek to get to zero in terms of traffic deaths, specifically focusing on pedestrian and bike deaths. And Wade Holland, who has been acting as the coordinator for the past year or two, was named as the official coordinator and now can focus full-time on that work. So I'm hoping there will be good things to come out of that in the future. And then finally, also related to transportation, Tuesday, February 4th, is Bus Day. So I encourage you all to take the bus on Tuesday. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Smith.
A number of things to report on. First, let me say that I attended the MML board meeting via conference call on Saturday. The big thing that I want to report is the Fall Conference 2021 will be in Turf Valley, Maryland. That's, I think, the first time we've ever had it there. So that's a really big deal. I had a meeting at Essex House the other day, and I was really concerned that the property manager and the landlord still have not gotten to a point where they are resolving and treating the residents in a way that I feel that all tenants should be treated in this city. They're also going forward with a 5% rent increase for all of the tenants in the building. I would recommend that my colleagues through the Housing Department review our policy when it comes to allowing nonprofit landlords like CPDC not to participate in rent stabilization. This has been a problem, and it has come up in other iterations in the city, and we still haven't done anything about it. I think we need to look at this now. I believe in carrots and sticks. We've tried a lot of carrots. We tried to work with CPDC, the landlord. This is not a small landlord. They're owned by an organization that does business on Wall Street. So now we need to bring some sticks. If they cannot treat their tenants in a way that everybody in Tacoma Park, I would expect, would be reasonable, then it is the responsibility of the council to step up and fill this void. I also would like to ask the city manager to reach out to leadership of Ride On. I continue to get complaints about buses dropping off the service schedule, drivers not picking up people. We had a meeting with the leadership of Ride On a number of years ago. It just seems like whenever there's a new county executive, they do whatever they want to do rather than what is their responsibility and their job titles. Mm-hmm. So it would be good if we can bring them in and make sure that they understand that the residents in Tacoma Park rely on public transportation, and if the bus says it's going to be there at 2:15, people expect it to be there at 2:15, not 3:15. Also attended the council retreat. I would like to thank Grace and Samara for the reports that they gave to us. I think they were very informative. There are a lot of things that are going on in the city that we as a council need to focus. I want to associate myself with Councilmember Siemens' comments about homelessness. I think there are a lot of homeless people that are living in this city. We just do not know about them. We have not identified them, but they are here, and we need to provide the resources to bring them back into our community. I attended a conference call hosted by the Council of Foreign Relations, and the guest speaker was Amy Myers Jaffe. She's a fellow for the David M. Rubenstein group. She's an expert on energy and the environment. Now that we're talking about sustainability, climate action next week, but she specifically said that there are a number of jurisdictions in the country that are looking at free bus service as an equity issue for residents and requiring buses to be electric by a certain period of time. I think that is something that we should reach out to our county council colleagues and ask them that they consider that in the next few years, especially the equity issue of free bus service. The House of Representatives just put out a bill for infrastructure. You can search it online. There's a lot of money provided. I'm on the National League of Cities Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. This has been a big issue for many, many years. So please take a moment to look at it. Hopefully you can reach out to our states, our U.S. senators, and ask them to support this bill. It would mean a lot for our roads, towns, bridges, rail in this region. Oh, and then the mayor did talk about some of the legislation for MML. Let me just update you on, it doesn't look like 5G will be going forward at the state level. There was a briefing in front of Ways and Means earlier this week. One thing that I have always tried to support is the league looking at additional revenue sources for municipalities because we are very constrained on how we can raise money. So the Director of Government Relations Manager, Justin Fior, highlighted the video lottery terminal model established when gaming first became legal in Maryland, which shared 5.5% of revenues with local governments. The point is that we want the Ways and Means to look at whenever they're thinking about taxing other things, whether it's online gaming, that municipalities should be able to get some of that revenue. It should not only go to the states and the counties. We are their partner. And then finally, there has been a bill that was dropped, and it is sponsored in the House and the Senate, that is asking for 100% of HUR monies to be restored and to eliminate the sunset clause. And that just happened recently. Thank you.
Great. Councilwoman Searcy.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone again for coming out, and I appreciate all of the comments on the climate action plan as well as potential solutions and edits that we can make. I think it's extremely helpful when folks come to the table with alternatives, and I appreciate the fact that people are doing so. For residents in Ward 6, we've had another bus shelter bite the dust thanks to vehicular homicide. So the bus shelter that's located near Lockney in Merrimack, unfortunately, someone accidentally backed into the bus shelter. City staff is working to get that bus shelter replaced. As I noted to residents, particularly those in New Hampshire Gardens, the bus shelter that was taken out by Prince George's Police, no offense, that bus shelter, we are still dealing with ADA issues, which is why it has not been replaced just yet. So we're working on it, and hopefully we will have at least one of the bus shelters replaced within the next couple of weeks. I want to give a special thanks to Montgomery County Parks folks, particularly Mohammed, as well as Daryl and Jan for working on the fallen tree that was blocking the Glenside trails in the park, to have folks turn out in a day to clear the path. It was really, really helpful. So definitely appreciate the work that folks are doing. And I know that the city manager will provide more insights on the Delegate Wilkins visit to the Crossroads area, and provide more insights on the impact of the Purple Line. So I don't want to steal your thunder. But I will say, and I'm kind of giving a charge to all of us to go out of your way to patron the businesses in the Crossroads area right now. It is critical that we, for all of the values that we have about small local businesses and wanting to make sure that we have them, that when we have small local businesses that are in financial distress because of construction associated with something that quite frankly will benefit us all once it's done, and for us to not do our due part to make sure that those businesses are able to survive construction, it's quite frankly a shame on all of us. So I encourage you all. I know traffic is horrible. I could barely get out of my driveway. But I encourage you all to go out of your way, identify the wonderful businesses in the Crossroads area that are currently negatively being impacted by the Purple Line, and really patron those businesses. They're wonderful, wonderful businesses, and encourage everyone to go out and do your part by shopping at those stores. So again, thank you all so much for coming out.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor. Just three things I wanted to talk about. Some have more than one part to them. I really appreciated all the great information that was presented by staff in particular, and the discussion with my colleagues as well at our priorities setting retreat on Saturday, and it went on for 6 hours, and a substantial number of residents came in for some for all of it and some for parts of it, which I think was really great. A few things that just emerged from that. One, Councilmember Sirsi just mentioned it, and I agree with her completely, and I actually put this in my weekly information I sent out earlier this week. I've talked in the past about the importance, even for people in Ward 1, I imagine lots of Ward 1 people are watching on TV now if they're not in the audience, that we should patronize the Crossroads Farmers Market and the other businesses over there. But now in particular, and one of the stats that emerged at that priorities session on Saturday was that some longtime beloved businesses over there have had 70% reductions in business. And so really we should, I was happy to put that in my info I sent out this week, but we really should all try to get over there and help support them. And if a lot of people do it, it actually can make a difference. So that's one thing. Second, there was a lot of other great information just on all the things that our staff is doing, and I'm hopeful that some of that, some more of that info will get out more generally to the public, and in particular on things like helping tenants who are struggling and some of the workforce development efforts alone. Those things struck me in particular, but lots of great work that the staff is being involved in. I don't think we should be surprised at that, but sometimes we just aren't aware of all the details. And also, for those who are interested, you know, we're in the early part of our annual budget cycle, but we are talking about, we spent a good amount of time at the retreat talking about setting a tax rate that's connected to constant yield, which is the rate that it'll be given to us by the state, but that would enable us to collect the same amount of revenue from the overall revenue from the property tax as we did last year, plus an adjustment that's tied to the cost of state and local employees' compensation. Now, whether that specific index is the right one to use, I don't know, but I think we're moving toward what I think will be more helpful when we get to the budget, which is setting that overall target and then trying to see what we can do within that. And so I think that will be helpful. Second thing is just a couple of updates on utilities. Those who've crossed Piney Branch and headed into North Tacoma will know there's a little one-block section between Piney Branch and where Tacoma Avenue starts. That's still in the district, and that part hasn't been paved because there's still work to be done with the bike path in that area. So that one block is not in great shape. But also the sidewalk along by the triangle-shaped park there, which is still technically in DC, but a lot of people walk on it. I had asked Pepco to do that, and they're out there. They've paved about half of that stretch right now. So since I complain about Pepco a lot, they are working on that. I just wanted to say that. There's another thing that I was hoping maybe the city manager could check with through Public Works as well. And this came up in one of the earlier meetings we had with Pepco. There were environmental services vehicles at the intersection of Maple and Carroll. And so people asked me, well, is there some sort of environmental problem there? At that point, which was last fall, the answer seemed to be no. They're back there again. And now it does appear there's some according to Pepco, very small amounts of leftover oil or gasoline residue there. But I'd like to really understand what it is and we've had some email exchanges on it, and Pepco is working on it, but I think it would be helpful to have a public statement from them, not necessarily from us or from both of us, so residents understand what's happening there. And then the
Can I
last
just follow
thing-
up, just to make sure
Yeah.
the city manager knows, I'm not sure if you were on those emails, that I did request, they did say they had a third-party consultant do an environmental analysis, and I did request to see the report, and we haven't heard back on that.
And it may be that it isn't a concern, I just don't know, but I think people realistically would just like to be able to understand what it is. And then the third thing is just on the sustainability plan. I know we're not really getting into it this week, and we'll be doing that next week with the public hearing and so on, but a number of people did speak tonight, so I just wanted to touch on that briefly. And I've said before, the things that I'm looking at are what level of government is appropriate to handle the various proposals that we've had. That's number one. Secondly, what's left out, I'd like to see us have more on adaptation and resilience, among other things. Others have mentioned, the transportation piece. And third, and this is only part of the things I have asked questions about, but better connections between our housing plan and our tree work, and ensuring that racial equity is blended in better, which David Blockstein mentioned. And the range of comments we heard, even from a relatively small number of people here tonight, included, to me, enough different ideas about exactly how we need to or could formulate this that I personally just think we need to take a little more time than what we're talking about in terms of a potential vote later next month to socialize it more. And I guess I mean socialize it in the sense of having it out in the community for further discussion as we try to understand these various components of it. So I'm not saying it is an emergency and we shouldn't rush into it, but I think we want to get it right. And I'm just a little concerned that if we don't have buy-in from the community, which I think we can get in a better way by taking a little more time, that will end up being less advantageous for us. So thank you.
Great. The nice thing about going last is most people have mentioned things I was going to mention. I will also just want to say thank you to Grace Wiggins, Samira Cook-Gaines in our Housing and Community Development Department for pulling together an event last Thursday night on housing for adults with special needs. It was a great turnout. I know Councilwoman Costick was here, Councilman DeBala attended as well. And so continuing those conversations and seeing them, they have been, but continuing to implement our housing and economic development plan, and particularly looking at that specific population. So it was a great meeting. A lot of good people and a lot of folks who are working in this area actually came to the meeting. So I feel like there's a lot of good connections made. So I just want to thank them for that. I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you very much. I wanted to put in writing just the notice that the mayor made last week about my intended retirement in June of 2021. And so this is something that if council members do want to reference it, it is something that's in writing. So I do plan to retire at the end of June 2021, so about 17 months from now. Announcement of my planned retirement at this time allows for a smooth transition. Funds for a city manager search process can be included in the FY21 budget that's now being prepared. Candidates for the next city council can be aware that a city manager search will be a top priority and a significant time commitment for the newly elected council. And the search process can be underway by the council while I'm overseeing staff's preparation of the FY22 budget in the spring of 2021. So I got 2 budgets to go. Internally, all departments will continue to systematize information and processes so that work can continue as the staff changes occur. I'm hoping to hire a new deputy city manager within a month, and that person will know that part of their job is to facilitate the smooth transition. Just wanted to note that by the time I retire, I will have been with the city for 27 years, and my son was born while I was working here, and he's now grown. So it's a real honor that I've been able to be associated with the people of Tacoma Park all this time. Speaking of jobs, the census really needs people to fill jobs. We were informed that we are a red area, an area that does not have enough census employees.
And we are like a highlighted area of needing particular attention. So people who want jobs, there's part-time and there's up to full-time jobs with the census. They pay between $29.50 and $32.50 an hour. Go online, sign up for jobs, get the word out. We will be working to get the word out.
And do that, and then take care of the compensation.
There you go. There you go. Oh, there folks already left. Yeah. There you go. Anyway, really, the folks at the Census Bureau are very concerned about this geography, that we do not have enough employees, enough staff signed up. So
Could I
please
ask one
encourage
question
that.
about
Yeah.
that? When you say there's not enough staff, that's these temporary staff
That's
that you're
right.
talking.
They're
It's not
temporary.
about the permanent Census Bureau.
It's not the
staff.
it's
Yeah.
not Suitland,
It's
Maryland.
this-
It's the work
this
on the
initiative.
2020
Okay.
census. Yeah. As Councilwoman Searcy noted, there was the visit to the businesses affected by the Purple Line on Monday by Delegate Janelle Wilkins and myself, City TV, and the Tacoma Langley CDA's Executive Director, Kaylee Gonad. It's absolutely remarkable. And it was fun for me to go into these businesses because they're wonderful businesses. And I have to say that I hadn't been in the baby department of Discount Mart, and I went back because I had 2 baby showers, and it was wonderful. There's a huge room of baby clothes and another huge room of strollers and car seats. So if people need baby clothes, it is, even with the traffic, it is a easier visit. It is hard to get there, but you don't have to go on University Boulevard to get to these stores. And so sometimes it's a little hints, and we're going to try to get the word out about the easiest way to be able to visit these stores. As has been mentioned, many of the stores have a decline in revenue of between 30 and 40%. Weekend declines are in the 70% market rate, and that's not sustainable. And what we are being told is that the utility relocation work will last a year. And that's just really, that is not sustainable. The thing that was interesting to me was hearing from the business owners. Each time it wasn't prompted by a question, it was brought up by these different business owners. You know, it's not just me that's hurting. I've had to lay off staff. I'm worried about my staff. My vendors are not getting as much business. I can't order as much for my store, and so they're also feeling the pinch. So there's ripple effects about the lack of payments. And, you know, if you park, you can go eat at a restaurant, go do the shopping, pick up food to go home. By walking around, people are walking. Surprisingly, a lot of people out walking. So once you park, you can do a lot of shopping, and I do encourage that work to happen by all of our residents. What I was appreciative of is that Delegate Wilkins is trying to take the video that we're collecting to make a strong push with her colleagues in Annapolis. We also want to use it in Rockville and in Upper Marlboro to say, counties, please help. I appreciated that the business owners were very specific about their issues and needs, so that Delegate Wilkins was thinking of changing her bill a little bit so it's more helpful for what they really need. So these were not people just said, oh yeah, things are bad. They gave real, tangible examples from their spreadsheets. I mean, it was very useful in that regard. So happy, we'll be bringing that information back. We'll be pushing it out. The business owners are willing to go on bus rides to Annapolis and Rockville to testify themselves and answer questions themselves. And so, and they were appreciative that we cared. So I think that was nice. Completely small item. We'll have a solar-powered pedestrian crossing signal be put up here on Philadelphia at the library. We've asked for these things for so many years, but we get one. Yes, please.
We really need that. I think it would also be helpful, if it's possible, to get a sort of a visual of what it would look like in advance, because questions like that always inevitably come up.
We're hoping
I don't know
to
if
see
it's possible, but.
Yeah, I think they're supposed to be sending over the plans for that.
I also just want to note that's not a small thing. That
No.
took a lot of work, and I
It took
appreciate.
I
I
shouldn't have used that term. No, we've been advocating for this
Yeah.
for so long, and so it's a big deal that State Highways agreed to do this. Yeah,
is it 100% off the grid?
that's my understanding.
Do we know how much electricity we'll be saving by?
I don't have the plans in front of me, but I know that we've received the information, so I can pass that on to all of the council members. Yeah.
But that has been a long-standing safety concern spot, so I
Oh,
think
sure,
in
and
that
there's a-
sense, it's really a big deal. Yep.
Yeah, it's a big deal in many respects, yeah. And I don't know why. I mean, it was so hard to convince State Highway that this purchase could happen. I always try to identify any right of first refusal properties, and 7502 Central Avenue is a vacant single-family home we've declined to act on. The corrective map amendment related to the Tacoma Junction project was passed by the county council. That was a very pro forma cleaning up a map change, a map mistake, but that has been finalized by the county council. And I wanted to note that the Tacoma Park Arts Celebrating Black History Month has 3 really neat programs coming up. One is a lecture from slavery to freedom, a Black Union soldier's life story told by the great-great-granddaughter of this particular person. A night of guitar music with Yasmin Williams, and overlooked films from the civil rights movement. One of the things I just want to note, our arts programs have been getting packed houses and really good media attention. They would love to have council members come. I know you guys are working a gazillion hours, but really some wonderful programs, and we're building a lot of connections with folks who haven't normally come to past events. So it's nice to see that growth in their visibility around the area. That's it for me.
Great, awesome. Any other questions for the city manager? All right, our work session tonight on election code amendments. I know we have 2 members of our Board of Elections here, and our city clerk who works on this as well. First, do you all want to say anything, or before we dive into this?
Hello again.
Hi.
I'm Brian Ernst, Ward 4, Chair of the Board. Appreciate all of your comments during the last session, written and verbal comments. I think to start, I would say you'll note that we've made a number of changes to the code based on some of the comments we received from you, but also, for better or for worse, the longer you look at the code, the more things you think you might want to change. So we did add some more definitions to the code to try to make it more clear about certain of the elements of the fair campaign section, in particular contributions and expenditures. So we're here for your questions on any of those additions, and can go through any of the previous ones one by one, or we'll happy to take yours questions as they come.
Great. The city clerk, have anything that you want to draw our attention to?
Well, only that we have Mr. Cornbrooks
Yes.
here tonight for this purpose as well, and he's done a run-through of the code. We have to all admit, he's at a bit of a disadvantage. He's jumped into this in the middle. And, but he is also here he has done a review of the code, made some recommended suggestions, and has responded on the cover sheet to some of your questions, and is here to provide advice and recommendations as well.
Great.
If you need them,
All
as you
right.
want them.
Well, let's dig in then. First, I ask my colleagues, did they have on the cover sheet, there were a number of questions that have been raised at our prior work sessions and responses from the city attorney. Was there anything regarding those questions that you would like the city attorney to go over? Councilwoman Kostick.
I just had a couple of very brief clarifications. So number one, with the definition of a campaign, You had noted that it would be sort of a generally understood definition of campaign. Does that include both a campaign for a person running for a specific office as well as a campaign for an issue or potentially against someone if there were a recall effort? Does that include all of those sorts of buckets of campaign, or is it more narrow just to a campaign of a person running to fill an office?
Well, I would say that you've identified the problem in trying to define campaign. So by allowing it to be undefined in the code, it gives us the greatest flexibility.
Okay. And then for number 5, you had talked about it being a Class B offense to not publish, or if a person publishes or distributes material that does not have the authority line. I assume in addition to it being a Class B offense, it would also be removed. Is that the...
Well, we can certainly address that. It is not addressed in the code as it is written, as I recall sitting here right now.
Okay. Is that something you would recommend that we
It would
add,
s-
or would we have the authority to... Do we need to add it in order for city staff to have the authority to do it?
It would make it more clear
Okay.
if it is in there. And
Mhm.
I think that if that is what you would like to see happen, I would recommend doing that.
Okay. Thank you.
So Councilman Costick, just so I'm clear,
yes.
What was your recommendation? Sorry, I want to make sure I
I
get
don't
the
know
right
if I
name.
necessarily have a recommendation,
Okay.
but I do, I mean, I think if we're requiring it, there should be some kind of recourse if people don't do it. So, I'm not sure whether it makes sense to have if you have recommendations, I would love to hear them. Yeah, I don't know if it makes sense to, allow someone a certain period of time before they, you have 24 hours to get that authority line on the sign, or it will be removed, or something like that. People make mistakes and don't always put things on, so I certainly don't want them to be collected and trashed or anything like
Right.
that. But I think if we're requiring it, we should follow up and make sure those things are removed if they don't have them and it's an ongoing problem.
Okay. Councilmember Kovar?
Yeah, just a handful of things on that point. It looked like we said in here, buttons aren't used very often. I think the first time I ran, I did have little stickers,
did?
which now wouldn't be valid because they don't have that, but we have to decide, we can pull the stickers off of people or whatever, or just say they can't use them. But the two things I wanted to ask about, on number 15 on surplus campaign funds, I was just wondering if we would be able to, and whether my colleagues would support this, but it says that the surplus, one possible use of surplus funds is just to be donated to an organization that has 501c3 nonprofit status under the U.S. Code. And so that's fine, but I was just wondering if it would make sense and if we could legally say something like that we wanted it to be an organization that was, active in this area in some way. Because, if I love, Arsenal football and they have a nonprofit fan support, should I send it to that stuff money people gave to me? I don't know. It just seems like, a U.S. version of U.S. supporters of Arsenal. I don't know. It struck me that it might be nice to somehow channel it toward this area.
You could make the suggestion that preference, if viable, should be given to local organizations.
Okay. I'd suggest we consider that. The second thing is on number 16, it said, would these rules apply to the 2017 campaign? I think what we really mean is would they apply to the 2020 campaign, right? And because we're in the 2020 cycle now.
No, the question was, are they retroactive? Like, for those of us who ran before, do we have to go back and say how we spent money?
Well, I wasn't even thinking of that. I'm thinking about, do we have to account for the first 2 years of this cycle? If I don't know, I didn't get any contribution, but if money came in or we spent a little bit of campaign money like this month, and we still
Right.
haven't passed this, I'm assuming this would only apply prospectively, but I think it would just be important to understand that if the question's clear. And then my last one, actually, I had one more, and I mentioned it before, and I was just curious. On number 6, I think I've said this previously, but in these in-kind contributions, when there's a host in their home, I think at the federal level, they kind of don't count that if it's below a certain amount. And just because it's hard to get it all, and around here, it's usually like cheese and crackers.
Sure.
Do we really want to require that, I guess, is
That's
the
your call.
question.
I mean, for that reason, it is very difficult to place a fair market value on it, for the reason you just
Yeah.
identified, but that's your decision as to whether you want it to be or not.
Okay.
Actually,
Brian wants to jump in a
I
couple
have
of
a-
others.
yeah,
Sorry, Brian.
I have a number of actually responses
Yeah.
for you, council member. So working backwards on the in-kind contributions, the additions to the code include now a $200 ceiling under which for like a residential party.
Okay.
For
I might have missed that, sorry.
in which you don't have to report it because it's something hosted at somebody's residence and they provided
That's
juice
exactly
or
what I was-
something.
that's
Yeah, and
exactly
so
what I
they-
want, so that's
that
good.
doesn't
Thank you.
that is excluded from the in-kind contribution requirements. Now, that's in page 3 under the definition of contributions. And
Got it,
then-
I see it. Number 2,
Number 3.
number 3?
Number 3.
Number 3, okay.
$200 in
That's
number
great. No, that's perfect. That's exactly what I was asking about. I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No
I
problem.
have nothing more to say.
Yeah.
On the 501c3, I think we had discussed as the board, including, we said 501c3 or a beneficiary of the city community grants fund,
Yeah.
since they may not have a 501c3 status. So it could be potentially narrowed to only previous beneficiaries of community grants funding, something like that, if you want it to stay within the city.
Okay.
And just something to think about. On the buttons, I have looked at the Maryland requirements on authority lines for different items. This goes both for electronic media and things like buttons. So they do not require authority lines for what they just call small items. And they just provide a few examples, and they say pens, buttons, bumper stickers, things like that.
Okay.
So I think it may not be in the code, but I would like to add it, and I think we just haven't had a chance to discuss, but something with that type of language where like buttons would be excluded from the
I mean,
authority
that would
line.
make sense to me, but I don't know.
Yeah, because I think the code actually has the opposite right now.
The code.
The draft
yeah,
right now, right?
Yes. It
Right.
it still requires a line of something on small item, like something has to be there. Yeah. I think that was it. That was all I had.
All right.
Thank you.
So before we get too far and we lose track of things, I just want to go back and just see if we have general. So on the last item that we just raised, the current draft does not reflect the idea that small items would not require an authority line. Is everyone okay with having that in our next iteration, or have any other questions on that? So buttons, however, the Maryland guidelines are written. That's the recommendation, and we're good with that. Okay. Just so that we close the loop on in-kind donations, we did raise this before, and thank you for responding to that and putting in the $200 ceiling. Are people okay with now with the definition of in-kind donations and how that would be accounted for? Are there any other questions on that? Okay. Regarding surplus funds, I think the draft right now talks about a 501c3 or community grants, so that's what's reflected in the draft right now. Would anyone like to suggest a change so it's only to community grants or something else?
Question. So I'm trying to figure out logistically the whole notion of community grant recipients that are non-501c3 and whether or not does it make sense for those resources to be like retro? So like we're trying to, people who may have received that grant like 10 years ago would be eligible? Or are you talking about like going forward? And if so, then would it need to go through this, would the appropriate vehicle would be through the city? So it would be like, as we're thinking through like donation policy, like you could donate to the city and those funds would then be a part of resources that could be used for future iterations of that program? Or are we talking about, if you've ever received a grant through that program in the city, you would be eligible to donate surplus funds to them?
Obviously, it's up to the council about what it is that you want to do. I would hesitate about anyone who's ever received them in the past because organizations change over time and whatever. To me, so most of our grants go to entities that have like a 501c3, but there's some very small grants that we look to do in-house that are of entities that don't have that. You may want to basically identify a pot that it gets to, and then it gets redistributed by you all or by the grants
Well,
committee.
this draft says last 2 years, so that would.
Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
I really don't have a strong recommendation, but I wouldn't want to go, even 2 years. I just know how things kind of work. But it's up to you on what you'd like to see.
And so under this surplus policy, like, would it be the case that someone could donate the money to the city? So let's say, for example, I would prefer to donate my surplus to like arts programming for the city. Maybe
the emergency fund.
Yeah, I got like, I raised $1 million. There you go.
But you can only get $1,000 per person.
So
that's really hard to do.
I would say the arts folks would love you.
But so under what we're talking about here, that would still be possible, right? Or no?
I'm not the one that can read the language on this, but I would just, I'm sorry, I would leave that to others' reading of it.
So, for me, what would help me is if you were to say, this is what I want to see happen, and then I can either frame the language or say, I need to go back and look at it and make sure whether we can do it or not.
I would like for us to also be able to donate surplus to the city.
Perfect. Okay.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yes, I think.
And I would like that.
Yes.
So I would agree with that, and I'm good with the 2 years, and I just think that if there were a way for me to structure the 501c3, something like, so there was something like that or benefit organizations that benefit or serve residents of Tacoma Park or the greater Tacoma Park community, however that would be defined. And then, you'd have to report it in your report, and that would be it. But so that there would be some sense, whether it's through these grantees, through what Talisha just suggested, or through other organizations, at least it's channeling it back into our area.
But then
in
who
some
gets to
meaningful way.
decide? I'm just curious, because so this is a question I have. So like, for my last campaign, I donated my surplus to a scholarship fund for Latino high school students that was in Montgomery County. I don't know for sure if anybody in the city of Tacoma Park received that, but like
the greater Tacoma Park community. What I'm talking about, that would be fine.
That would be,
But
okay.
I don't know whether Skiff has the ability just because I think it's fine, and I don't know whether, but to me, I would just rather have that local or regional connection in some way. That's all I'm saying. If some of it went to a person who lived in Tacoma, DC, or Silver Spring, or a little further away, it wouldn't bother me. I just don't want it to be like I'm giving it to the Indiana, Philharmonic or whatever.
Anyone else?
I have an unrelated question, but if others want to talk.
I guess I'm just trying to figure out what direction we give Skip in writing this section. Councilwoman Smith, do you have thoughts on this one?
No.
All right, so I'm going to put forward, why don't we see if we can limit it to some language to that, and we'll move forward. Is that okay, Brian? Yep, okay. I have Councilman Costick and then Smith.
So I have a question also about surplus funds and how they're handled in terms of reporting for the next, if they're kept and recycled if someone runs again, is that considered to be part of the candidate's own contribution, so there's no limit on it, or is that, I mean, I think it would be unusual to have more than $1,000 in surplus at the end, but would it be subject to the limitations? Or would it be considered to come from the candidate themselves? Does that make sense?
It's a good question, and actually, I mean, I think in our view, it would be considered coming from the candidate. It's a new cycle, new election cycle, but I don't think that's actually maybe clear in how it's currently written.
Yeah, if we can just make sure that's clarified, that would be useful. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Smith?
Thank you guys for working on this. I got a question regarding nonprofits. You know, the city gives a lot of grants in the city, and I don't think this is covered in the code. But what happens if a nonprofit helps you by sponsoring an event or does something for you during a campaign? How do you guys handle, how would that be handled?
So I guess it depends on if it's coordinated or not coordinated. This is the larger federal discussion as well, right? That you can spend unlimited amounts if it's uncoordinated with the actual candidate, and so it's not considered a direct donation.
And so who would define that, or who would review whether or not something is coordinated? Would you guys do a PIA, and would the Board of Elections do a PIA and see if there are emails being exchanged between parties? I mean, I know what you're saying, but how would that
I think
come out?
It would have to be very clear. Some evidence would have to come to light that it was coordinated, that
Okay.
you had that there was direct conversation between the candidate and the other entity about putting together a specific message, and so that was then paid for by someone else, and not reported on your contributions.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. All right, so any other questions on the cover sheet questions? I had raised the two things on email that I just want to make sure we're all clear on. On page 7, under section campaign contributions and expenditures, and on page 9, when we talk about not having to report campaign contributions under $25, but on page 7 it says we need to report anyone. So I just, I know the city attorney has responded to this, but if you could maybe just tell us what your response was, and so make sure we're all clear on this and whether or not the language needs to be clarified.
Correct, and I would also welcome the board to speak about what their intent was there, but my interpretation of the language that I received from them was with respect to 512.020 on page 7D, candidates shall not retain anonymous contributions of any amount. And then when you go over to page 9, it talks about dollar amounts in which you receive their contributions less than $25, and the reporting, the optional reporting there. My interpretation of that is any anonymous contribution has to be returned. The less than $25, it's up to the candidate whether they want to report it or not. Was that the intent of the board in those two paragraphs?
Yes. So if it's under 25, you don't have to report it as long as you know who gave you the money. So you might want to keep your own record of who you received funds from, but it's not required to be reported. But anything that was anonymous would be then returned to the city fund.
Even if it's under $25?
Even if it's under $25.
So I would actually, and I like to propose that we that we clarify this and make it easier and say we have to report any amount donated, because if we're going to institute the cap of $1,000, I find this could be really confusing, especially for someone who's running for the first time and keeping track of things. And I don't want somebody to inadvertently get confused. And I do think this is confusing. I've now run for election 3 times in the city. Reading this over the weekend, I found it confusing. And so I think I would actually like us to consider just saying any contribution, no contributions can be anonymous, and all contributions need to be reported. And that way also, I think it's easier for the individual to keep track, is somebody getting close to the $1,000? And then also, if there was some kind of complaint or something, we also have the records for that. Because otherwise, if we think somebody donated more than the $1,000, but how would we know? So anyway, I would recommend we get rid of the non-reporting for under 25. I'm seeing heads nod from the Board of Elections folks. Is that, other folks okay with that? All right, good. All right, so we'll make that change. The other point I brought up was, see, page 8, or under the section use of similar to what we were talking about, I guess, a little bit before about the surplus funds, use of contribution amounts for certain purposes. I was looking at number 4 that says may be transferred to another authorized political committee for the purpose of nominating or electing said candidate to any local, state, or federal office. And then D on that same page said a contribution should not be transferred from a candidate's campaign account to another candidate or another national, state, or local committee or of a political party. And again, if the city attorney can speak to this one.
Okay, so the mayor raised a good issue with which, again, I'd like to know the board's intent, obviously, and then the mayor and council's intent, that would help make sure that we have this consistent throughout. But the way I read these 2 provisions, the candidate, let's say candidate A, raises funds, they can then take those funds and use them in any other election. But candidate A would not be able to take funds that candidate A raised and give them to candidate B or another political committee in any election. There is, and Mayor, after we had our email exchange, as I was preparing for tonight, I located another section of the code where it talks about, where it's talking about surplus funds, and it indicates that they will only be used in a city election. So I just need to know what you all want with respect to that, and then we can make it consistent throughout.
Yeah, I think that interpretation is correct for what we were aiming for, which is if you were to have run for office and decide that you now want to run for county council, you could take the existing funds in your campaign account and use them in another campaign, for your own campaign. But you can't transfer it to a different candidate. So you can just keep it for yourself for use in a race that's not for a city election. So I think the language about the city-only election needs to be updated. I think it's probably way in the back of the code in another section.
It is, yes.
Yeah. So.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we can clean up that language. All right. Those were the only other 2 things I had. Looking through this, I know it's a little confusing with all the red line and everything, and it's been a while since we looked at this. But do my colleagues have any other questions that are raised? And I know the city attorney has mentioned to me that we need to go through for consistency. We took out political committee, for example, and it still shows up in a few places. And so there's other cleaning up to do. And as the city clerk mentioned, the city attorney has jumped in on this, and as we are had many work sessions on it. So we are open to, if there are other things that you see as you're going through this and cleaning it up that you want to recommend in terms of cleaning up the language. I'm sure the council and the Board of Elections would be happy to entertain those.
Mayor, with your permission, would it be okay if I were to speak directly with the Board of Elections about these issues offline and
Absolutely.
gather their intent and
Yes. Yep.
make a streamlined approach for you?
Yes.
Thank you.
I just have one last question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying I'm against it. I just wasn't sure I knew the logic or the rationale behind saying that we, I guess, wouldn't be able to transfer funds to another campaign. So, I mean, if I wanted to support one of my colleagues in their run the same year I was running, and I had to spare $50 in my campaign account, are we saying, and if we're saying it, it's okay, I just want to understand that we are and what the logic is. I couldn't give $50 to the Talisha Searcy reelection campaign? And if so, what's the story?
I mean, so the rationale is that the people contributed to your campaign because they believed in you as a candidate. Thus, whether you're running for the city or the county or for the state, they're contributing to you as the person and not to someone else. And so we don't want to redirect their funds to a candidate that they may not support.
But isn't that my problem with them?
You could say so, but yeah, I think the intent is that it's trying to protect the voters and their political intent.
I would love the money, Peter. Bring it on. Okay, so now that raises another question for me, which seems like this is becoming a very circular discussion. Would we need to inform people who are contributing to our campaigns that their funds might be used to support nonprofit, like any unused funds might go towards various nonprofits? Because, I mean, in the nonprofit world, like that, the same could be true. Like, I can't take the money that you gave to me for a campaign and direct it to a nonprofit that you may not agree with. Like, I could send the money to Planned Parenthood and that might hurt your feelings. So, I mean, would it need to be the case that you would have to explicitly state when you're collecting those dollars from people that, you know, there's a chance that their funds may go somewhere else?
Y'all are getting too much money if you have excess.
I mean, not saying there's a lot, but I'm just trying to make sure I understand, because it's like, in my mind, trying to rationalize it, it's the same case. Like, whether you're sending it to a nonprofit or you're giving it to another candidate, you're still redirecting a contribution that was given to you for one purpose to another purpose. And so is it that you need to make sure that you include the necessary disclaimers that you're giving funds that can go wherever?
I mean, I would argue that when you contribute to somebody, you're letting them use their best judgment on how to use your money. I mean, that's already true. If you give money to Jamie Raskin, he might just give that to another candidate in another state. That's part of the deal. And he can make, in certain cases, he can make contributions to organizations from it too, I think. I'm not singling out Jamie, but I don't know. I don't, to me personally, I don't think that would be necessary, but to clarify that.
You could make the argument that they're on notice by the fact that it's in the code. But if you wanted to explore the process for doing that, we certainly could put that requirement in there. I think it might be onerous on the candidates.
Councilman Costick.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just had my.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
So, Mayor,
Yeah.
I just had a quick question. You know, one of the things that came up earlier was the idea that with the Council Compensation Committee, that there may be an interest in having funds so people who don't otherwise have funds can get yard signs or some other things. So an alternative might be that there's a fund that the extra monies go towards campaign finance in some respect. So just an option.
Did you have something, Arthur?
Two matters that the council might also want to consider. One is on page 14, 516040. Previously, Councilmember Kovar had indicated concern about the time for allowed for voting provision. And one possibility is to simply eliminate that section. Right now, we have simply eliminated the after 5 minutes, so folks can think about that.
And if I could address that, because I certainly saw that recommendation from the board, and at first blush, my initial reaction was, of course, why would we have that in there? But then upon thinking about it, I said, what if we find ourselves in a situation where an individual is delaying, or an individual or individuals are delaying the voting process for the collective group?
Yeah.
And that's why I modified the change to that way. I wanted the board to, and the judges, to have the authority to remove someone if they were interfering with the voting process. But I can change it any way you want.
No, it's, makes sense to me. Was there
So
something else out there?
As
Yeah.
long, I know that was Councilmember Kovar's concern, so as long as
Well, I would
Councilmember
imagine that would be used highly infrequently, because it can take a while to flip all those coins before you're ready to make your decision.
And the other matter the council might want to visit is on page 6, down at the bottom of the page, section D, talking about campaign signs. This is a matter that came up before. Right now, we continue to have the language there allowing campaign signs on election day in the right-of-way, and we also have the special call-out about how campaign signs shall be placed only on private property. We have before thought about the fact that perhaps what we should simply do is punt to the city's general sign code in these matters. So we may only want to keep in this section the provisions about allowing campaign signs on the premises in particular hours. That mirrors what the state of Maryland does. And then, of course, the city will be considering the sign code in general and can revisit those right-of-way matters.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yes, let's make that change. Thank you, Arthur.
Okay.
I would say
Anything else, Brian? Yeah.
I have one other item, which is on electronic communication and
Yes.
digital
Thank you.
pieces.
I forgot that, yes.
Yes. So I also looked through State of Maryland to see what their guidance is on this. It's not always clear. I think in general, personal accounts of candidates can do what they choose as far as it comes to authority lines. It's the account of yourself. It's not the account of the campaign, for example. But I like if it's the Stewart for Mayor Twitter account, that one should have some sort of a authority line. I think that's been in practice, seems to be quite varied across the different politicians in the state. If you look at David Moon's Twitter account, for example, he has a little short line that says like paid for by David Moon. But like Will Smith, the state senator, does not have anything on his account.
You just keep calling out our delegation today.
Well, the first ones that come to mind. So those were the ones I looked at. At the same time, the state does say if there's character restrictions or like it's a very small amount of space, you can link to something else that is very clear that this is
Like your website.
Like your website, right? Something like that shows like this is the campaign account and this is paid for by the campaign.
Right.
So
you have an Instagram account. As long as the Instagram account for your campaign, the account has paid for by, that's fine. But
Right.
not, your Instagram post doesn't have to.
right, that's right.
And we should make sure that's clear in here. Because I'm not sure it's really clear to me. When I read that, that was actually another question I had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with regards to that, if it is an unpaid account, I mean, in many cases, you wouldn't necessarily be paying for your Instagram account. You might be paying for ads to show up, but you still would be required to do that. Is that right? So it was sort of an authorized by, you knew it was coming officially from the candidate, not from a third party?
Right, so if it's like if it's the account and on just like the bio or the description of it and it's your campaign account, then you would put something on it.
Okay.
Again, it seems from the general like use of this around at least Maryland, it's pretty inconsistent among different candidates and how they decide to apply it to their accounts. But they all tend to link to their websites, so maybe they're all covered in that sense because they have their websites that have the clear designation of what it's for.
So I guess the guidance here is we want to be able to link it back to know the source of something, but we do not want something so onerous on a particular candidate that it inhibits their ability to communicate through these channels.
That's right. Yeah.
So
exactly.
is that clear?
It is.
Okay. That is our intent. You write that language.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Anything else, Brian?
Nothing from me.
All right. Councilman Costa, because you're like,
Oh, sorry.
sorry. All right. Then I think if there's nothing else, yes.
I have two questions.
yes, okay.
For clarification.
Yes.
Mayor, you mentioned the political committee.
Oh, yes.
Are there thoughts about whether we want that in or out? The definition was removed. Language is still throughout about committees. There are arguments for, against. I don't know what the board's position is why. So
I can say a little bit why we were taking out committee. Currently, and I think if city clerk wants to contribute here, there is no requirement to like register a committee with the city. There's nothing that makes you put some designation that you are a political committee, except so it seems like we were putting something in the code that didn't have a clear designation.
I think that's right. I think there was language that said 2 or more people who were acting together as a political committee. I said, in my time here, I've not encountered a political committee. No one has ever tried to register. I wouldn't know what to do with them if they did. So either we need to have more detail or we need to get rid of it. I think this next election will provide a lot of guidance as to what we need to think about in the future, because I have a feeling it's going to be different than it has been in the past.
right, and my concern is now that we're reporting contributions, there are ways to manipulate contributions that, from an enforcement perspective, if you don't have a definition of committee as it is laid out here, the board could find themselves with information in front of them as to contributions and not have clarity as to where they're coming from, but it would be clear that it could be a committee and they need to investigate it.
So you're saying that's a reason to get rid of that?
I'm
for
saying
now.
it's a reason to keep it
To
and
keep
allow
it.
the board the flexibility and reevaluate it after this election cycle. But I'm happy to discuss with the board and go through various scenarios with them.
Okay. All right. I think that makes sense.
So what would happen, can I just ask,
Yeah.
if like a group of people just got together and said, we don't like so-and-so's reelection, we're gonna get all this money together and, start sending out all these things to defeat them, I guess they can do that, right? But if they're getting contributions, is that the question? Should we know who's contributing to that? Is that?
That's where it gets really complicated. But yes, I mean, that's one scenario that we could be confronted with.
That kind of goes back to my question about the campaign. That was sort of where I was trying to go with that. And I think, I agree it's never been done before, but I do think if it's something that could potentially happen, it would be nice to have some guidance so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we don't know what to do and there is some loophole.
Yes, ma'am.
Yep. Good. Okay. Did you have one more question?
One more
Yeah.
question. And the clerk and I discussed this, and we certainly realize that this is potentially opening Pandora's box, but there's a long period of time between the start of the campaign season, if you will, and the election and the number of reports. There are, I think, only 3 reports in the code as it is currently written. And from experience in other jurisdictions, I can tell you that after the first cycle, there was a clamor for more reports. And I just want to throw that out there to see if there's any interest in evaluating that at this time, whether the number of reports is adequate.
Do you have a recommendation?
From a legal perspective, it's adequate the way it is. There are all kinds of political questions that are raised with the timing of the reports and the frequency of the reports.
From these other jurisdictions, did they implement more reporting requirements that you're talking about?
Yes.
And how many more did they?
Well, sir, it depends on the election cycle and what their campaign season is and the timing of it, because it can be very, very difficult for the candidates and time-consuming when you're tracking contributions and expenditures and having to meet those. But I'd have to double-check the exact dates, but it seems like one jurisdiction that comes to mind, it's basically one every 7 to 10 days during the election cycle. And that is very difficult for the candidates. But what ends up happening is the people that pay the most significant attention to them are the candidates, and then they're bringing issues to the attention of the voting public. And it makes a lot of work for the Board of Elections, a lot of work for the city clerk, a lot of work for the city attorney, but I will tell you that once some of this information comes out, and if you have a report right very close to a couple days prior to the election, and then one after, and there are discrepancies in there, and the election's already taken place, people ask a lot of questions.
Right.
And it presents more problems for the elected officials and staff.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think I would be interested in maybe something more frequently, but what you just said seems too much.
I would agree.
That is just,
I agree
that's, I was just like.
I agree completely, Mayor.
Madam Chair, I am, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, this adds one additional report.
What
So
pages I'm looking for?
I'm sorry, page 9.
Thank you.
Prior to, in the prior version of the code that you've been working under, there have only been 2 reports.
Right.
One after the election and one, I can't remember the timing of it, but there were only 2 reports. This adds one. So this is one post-nomination report, one before early voting starts, and then a post-election report. So this is adding a 3rd report.
And roughly how much time would there be between the number 1 and number 2, would you
I
say?
can chart that out for you. I don't, off
Like
the
a
top of
month
my
or something
head.
like that?
Yeah, so.
Yeah, it's usually like
Right.
3 weeks.
Early voting starts October 22nd. The nominating caucus is September 15th? Something like that. It's the
Brian, you don't
first-
have it memorized yet?
I thought Arthur David would have it memorized, so.
So it'd be about a 4-week period, right?
I believe so, and then a post-election. So the voters would see that final report before the start of, it would basically be a report at least before they start voting. So it would be 2 reports. Yeah. But
seems
this is
like
new
it-
territory, so.
It's
if
pretty
the-
good, actually.
Well, is the one right before the early voting, when do we have that one? Like,
Well, this one is 7 days before the start of early voting. Actually, they're pretty close together, so, yeah, then there's a long time. Let's take a look at this.
yeah, let's look at it.
Yes.
Because I think what the city attorney is
Yeah.
saying is, if there are concerns to be raised, you know, like,
Yeah,
seeing like how much time there could be before.
yeah, let's
Yeah.
plot it out and see
Yeah,
what
let's
makes
plot it out and
sense.
see if we want to add another one, but not so a candidate's turning around.
And I did not
Numbers
mean
every
to be,
week.
to be advocating for that.
Yeah. Okay, any other?
No,
issues
ma'am.
to raise? All right, Councilmember Kovar, is that an old light?
No, that's not all that.
All right, then we thank you so much to the Board of Elections. I know
Thanks.
this has been, you've put a lot of thought into this, and we very much appreciate it. So And we are looking at new territory this year, so
We are.
it'll be exciting.
It might be, maybe in a few months, it would be good for us to come and give a election preparation report to the council.
Yes.
Sometime April, May, something like that.
Yes.
As we're looking at vendors for different things and site visits.
Great. Yes, and I do also think as we're getting close to the time when people are starting to think about running too, is at the Board of Elections is thinking about maybe holding a meeting so people can come and ask questions and do that would be really nice as well, and understand. There might be, because we're changing a bunch of things, it's gonna be different this year, so we may actually want to do that to give people the opportunity to come ask questions, even if they're not thinking of running themselves, but people may not want to understand the whole process a little better, including some of us.
Good idea.
So thank you very much. Good, and thank you to our city attorney for joining us this evening. We just have two other small items on our agenda tonight. One is the purchase of replacement vehicles for the police department and the lease of 3 electric vehicles for the police department.
Do you have the boards and commissions tonight?
We don't have any tonight,
Okay.
so.
There's nothing
yeah.
present tonight. That's fine. So there's these two items. The first is it's the work session on the single reading ordinance authorizing the purchase of 2 police department vehicles. These are Ford Hybrid Patrol SUVs. They're both replacement vehicles. They're not adding any new vehicles to our fleet. One of the vehicles was in our equipment replacement reserve for replacement because of age and meeting the criteria. The other is a replacement of a vehicle totaled in the crash. The fiscal considerations identify the cost of the 2 vehicles. One is $54,386 and one was $57,286 for a total cost of $111,672. $62. The second vehicle will be paid from $16,825 in insurance funds. The remaining $40,000 will need to come as part of a budget amendment, the difference in the cost. The more expensive vehicle, which is that one, includes a prisoner partition. And so that's one of the things that does allow for safety for both the prisoner and the officers. And we've seen that in other jurisdictions, it's not a good idea to have the prisoners in your front seat. So there's some other issues related to that. In any event, this is a very standard item. I'm happy to discuss that, but I'll just go ahead and mention the other one as well. It's a lease of 3 electric vehicles. We've been leasing electric vehicles for our neighborhood services team. And we had previously 2 Chevy Spark electric vehicles and 1 Chevy Volt hybrid vehicle. The leases for the vehicles expired. As we were looking at what would be the appropriate vehicle to replace these with, we came up with the Chevy Bolt. So that's the proposed use is the Chevy Bolt electric vehicle. The annual cost for the leases are $336 per vehicle for a total annual cost of $10,000 for the 3 vehicles, and it's a 3-year lease. We don't need to adjust any budget items particularly because of these. It's very similar to our past budgeted items. But because it's over $10,000, it's before you. It's $10,008. It's before you, and we would like your approval to move forward on voting item next week on these.
Perfect. Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, I have a question. In our environmental impact of action on the blue sheets, is it possible that you guys could estimate how much energy we're saving by leasing or buying these different types of electric or hybrid cars?
I will find out if we can do that. Certainly, because we're replacing these hybrids with hybrids and the electrics with electrics, we're not necessarily saving more in this round.
But they are supposed to be more
But we
efficient.
sure don't use gas and that kind of thing for
Right.
these. So I'll see what I can find out.
Councilmember Kovar.
Can you just have, for when we vote on it, what the story was with the accident?
Okay.
Thanks.
Councilman Costick?
I don't have any problem with it, and I think it may make sense, but I'm just curious why we are leasing the sort of, what are they, neighborhood services kind of vehicles versus purchasing, and if there's a budgetary impact on that.
I think it's something we may change in the future. When we first went to getting vehicles for the neighborhood services team, we wanted to do electric, but things were kind of new, and we got a really good deal for leasing. And it was something that we could just handle, and so we could move that direction quickly. So then we're kind of stuck with leasing, trying to decide that. But it is something we've been talking about. Is it something that we should move to a purchase? I don't have a recommendation for that yet, but it certainly has been part of the vehicle committee looking at that. At this point, they recommended moving forward with re-upping leases for this time.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense to me, and we've had the same calculation with electric vehicles in our family, so I totally get it.
You know, I think one of the things that's pretty, I mean, we're going to move to almost everything electric vehicle over a relatively short time. As soon as they meet the standards for the various types of vehicles, we're moving that direction. But some of it's a little bit of a pilot, and so we keep trying and seeing how they work.
Great. All right. Seeing no other comments or questions, these will come back to us to vote on next week, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.